Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with aBlogtoWatch. Please subscribe to our videos on YouTube and like this video if you find it useful. This is a review of the Jaeger-LeCoultre Duometre Chronographe. This is a great watch. It's, you know, this is a watch lover's watch right here. So if you see one of these on somebody, you're going to know that guy or that woman really likes watches. The Duometre is a collection that came out several years ago, and basically all the watches in the Duometre collection have something in common. And let's just flip over the movement here. It's a little bit difficult to tell, but basically these two things right here are the mainspring barrels, and it has one for running the time and another one for running all the other components in the movement. So the idea is simple. In order not to lose amplitude, in order to sort of keep timing stability, the watch wants to dedicate an entire barrel just to telling the time, and then it uses other power for the other complications, which in this case is a chronograph, in order to basically keep the time rate stable. So it's all about accuracy over time. So it's an interesting concept, and I think it works well. Now, one thing you'll notice here about the movement, this is actually the in-house made Jaeger-LeCoultre caliber 380A. And what's special about this one is it's made a little bit different than other JLC movements. It's actually made like a Langenzona movements. It uses something called German silver as the material. So you can see it's kind of a little bit golden in its look. So watch movements are mostly made from brass. And then what is done to them is all the pieces go through a plating process, usually rhodium plating, which creates kind of a steel, silvery look to them. The reason that that's done is twofold. One, brass is much simpler to process, meaning to cut, than, say, steel. So cutting steel would make things a lot more difficult, and you don't need the rigidity or hardness of steel in a movement. So that's why brass is used. Why is it then plated? Well, that's because brass has a tendency to corrode and to sort of decolor over time. So German silver, which actually has no silver in it, is mostly a combination of, I think, nickel and some other materials, does not need to be plated. And so it holds a polish much better and is much more beautiful. It does develop a bit of a patina, which means that over time it tends to get a little bit more, I guess you could say, golden. So it starts out being more silvery, and then over time it sort of turns a little bit more golden. So what you can tell here, for example, is the mainspring barrels, which I believe are not in German silver, are a little bit more silvery than the other bridges. The movement is finished very, very nicely, and it's really the type of thing you want to see in high-end watchmaking. Jaeger-LeCoultre does a very nice job with these watches and takes it seriously. So I think that from a mere aesthetic standpoint, it's very difficult to be anything but impressed with a movement like this. So the 380, I think, has about 50 hours of power reserve and some interesting complications. So let's look at the front of the dial here. This particular there's a few versions of the Duometre chronograph, and this one has what they call the open wings. So there's these skeletonized parts right here that are cut in the dial with a view into the movement. This is probably my favorite version of the watch because I like that view into it. There's one with a closed dial. There's a black dial, actually, which is very, very rare to find in a watch like this. And it's cool. So what you're seeing here is on the left, you have sort of an off-centered eccentric dial there for the time. And then you have a central seconds hand. And then the rest of the dial is dedicated to the chronograph. So here's how it works. So the actual chronograph is running right now, and it's a mono-pusher chronograph. So right here you have something called a flying seconds hand, which is also called a fudriante hand. And it's measuring 1/6 of a second accuracy. So we can stop it right now, and let's look how long we've been measuring. So it's a full 12-hour chronograph. And so we stop right here. We look at the hours. So it's about a half hour. It's between 12 and 1 there. So it's about, and you look at them, so it's at 40 minutes. We have about 41 minutes there. Yes, almost 41 minutes. So it's basically 40 minutes, about 56 seconds, point 1. So that's how you basically use the chronograph. So this dial here has hands for both the hours and minutes, and then here you would have the seconds. And since it's a mono-pusher chronograph, you push it again, it would reset it, and then you can start it again. having the chronograph running most of the time ends up looking like a split-second chronograph because there's two hands that look like, right now, I don't know, they look like an X kind of moving around there. You know, and that's that's kind of interesting because they're both measuring different things. But seeing that Fujiranta hand, it never looks bad. It's just kind of cool seeing that hand there. It almost looks like animation because it jumps from position to position rather than moving smoothly. So you really look like you're watching something which is like you know, animated like a cartoon, which is kind of interesting. And reading the chronograph is obviously very legible because of the high contrast of the dial. And I like there how on the time you have different colors, so that it's in gold, of course, so that you can determine the difference between the chronograph indicators and the time indicators. The watch is 42 millimeters wide, which I would say is not huge, but a very good size for a watch of this type. Usually these types of classic-looking watches tend to be smaller, so I personally prefer and appreciate this 42 millimeter wide size. It does wear heftily because there are not long, but well-sized lugs. And the case, of course, is an 18 karat. I think it's pink gold. So it does have a substantial look on the wrist. It's very, very beautiful, and detailing on the dial is really excellent. It's crisp. As I said, Jaeger-LeCoultre made sure that the contrast is very high. And what you also have here in the skeletonized areas or the open areas are power reserve indicators. And there's a power reserve indicator for each of the two barrels. And so the way you would wind the watch is you turn it one direction to wind one of the barrels and the other direction to turn the other barrel, and it has these power reserve indicators, which are nice. One thing I noticed which is interesting, if the power reserve for the time, which is located on the left, is all the way down, the chronograph can't run. So it needs to have at least a little bit of power in the main barrel, or the barrel for the time, in order to operate, for the chronograph to operate as well. But that's just a little something that I noticed. I was curious about it. I was like, could you run the chronograph if the time was all the way down? No, you can't. These pieces are very, very handsome. There have been other watches by other brands that have tried to replicate the look, but no one can quite take it away from Jaeger because there's just sort of a very distinct and iconic look. I love Jaeger-LeCoultre sport watches. You know, the Master Compressor is such a cool collection, and the Master Collection is great as well. But I think that if you want to combine a classic look with a high complication watch that isn't like extremely designed, which, you know, like some of the Hybris Mechanica watches, I think the Duometre collection is definitely a way to go, and the Chronograph one is just a great piece. There's other versions as well. There's the Moon Phase one, and there's some other models that you'll have to check out. I think there's also a smaller version, which is 40. So if the 42 is too big, I think there's a 40 as well, though. Again, like I said, I prefer the 42. This watch, the Duometre Chronograph, retails for $47,000, and you can see the full review on aBlogtoWatch. Thanks.